Namaskar to all who are watching and a very warm welcome to the Festival of Bharat. We are an online forum that seeks to create pertinent, balanced, and authentic content on diverse topics pertaining to Bharat, and in doing so, serving the cause of Sanatan Dharma. Contemporary Bharat is controversy's favorite child. I say this because rarely has there been a time where so much has been said or protested against or railed against in our society, and the opinions so conflicted that oftentimes it's very difficult and challenging to separate the grain from the chaff. To talk through some of the most contentious issues today surrounding us today and other things besides, I have with us a very special person. Dr. Vikram Sampath is the author of six acclaimed books: Splendors of Royal Mysore, The Untold Story of the Wadiyars. My name is Gauhar Jan, the Life and Times of a Musician, Voice of the Veena, S. Balachandra biography, and Women of the Records. His latest books are the two-volume biography, Savarkar, Echoes from a Forgotten Past, and Savarkar, A Contested Legacy from Penguin Random House, India. Both of these have gone on to become national bestsellers and have been acclaimed by none other than the Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji himself. Dr. Sampath was in fact recently conferred the honor of being elected as a fellow of UK's prestigious Royal Historical Society. He was awarded the Sahitya Akademi's first Yuva Puraskar in English Literature and the ARSE International Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York for his book on Gauhar Jan. An engineer, mathematician from BITS Pilani, and an MBA in finance from SP Jain, Mumbai, Dr. Sampath is also a trained Carnatic vocalist. He has established the Archive of Indian Music, India's first digital sound archive for vintage recordings, and is the founder director of the Bangalore Literature Festival, Indic Thoughts Festival, and Art, a cultural fest. So I'm absolutely delighted to have Vikramji in our midst today, and I'm so glad he could make some time. Thank you.
Thank you, Pujitaji. Thank you so much for hosting me.
So, Vikramji, I trust you're doing well. I believe you're based in Bengaluru, as we call it today. So how are things at the City of Gardens at the moment?
Yes, I am indeed in Bengaluru, and it's a city that needs urgent attention of the government, whichever party. I somehow find it very hard that the governments don't give the city, which is hailed as the IT capital of India, the importance it deserves when it comes to infrastructure. Very, very bad state of urban infrastructure and planning, but still, according to me, one of the best cities in the country to live in.
Right, and that brings me to my next question. I remember reading somewhere that you claimed Bengaluru is your first love, or you claimed Bengaluru to be your first love. So my question is, has your love wavered over the years, or has it withstood the test of time, or you find yourself falling in love?
Other people, of course, it has changed. With other people, if it's other people, it's of course changed. But as far as a place to stay and what I can call as home in India, I think it would always be Bengaluru, because it's the city, even before it became this IT capital and this tech hub, it was always a city of it was called pensioners' paradise before. It was a haven for thinkers, for poets, for scientists. It was a knowledge center, and the wonderful weather here and the gentleness of the people here, I think all of it is very conducive for intellectual ferment to happen. And so no wonder, I think the maximum number of Gyanpeeths in India comes for Kannada literature, and a lot of them belong to this city. So I think that character of the city still remains. So there are today the tagline, I come from two India. So similarly, I come from two Bengalurus. One Bengaluru, which is still that old world, gentle, charming, remnant of both the British cantonment and the Wadiyars, Mysore, and also where parts like Baswangudi and Jayanagar and Malleshwaram.
Malleshwaram,
Yeah, the hardcore, the authentic Kannada culture where you can find that lovely idli and dosa and MTR.
And the temples.
Yes, temples and all of that. And on the other side, you have it coexisting with this fast-paced IT and BT culture, which is fueling so much of our country's growth. And the city seamlessly embraces both. As I said, I just wish our governments and our urban planners made it much better than what it is. I just came back from Hyderabad and I was quite, and all the time Hyderabad and Bangalore are in contest with each other when it comes to infrastructure. Hyderabad, I think, takes the cake, miles away, the way the roads are, the highways and the flyovers and all that are constructed. Here it takes decades and decades and so much of corruption within the urban planning. So I think that is the sad part, where the city's administrators and politicians are letting the city down and its people down. But still, it's, I think, a very activist and urban activist driven city. So despite the callousness of the administration, somehow I think it's the people of the city who are running it so well.
Absolutely, I agree. I lived in Bengaluru in 2002 myself for a bit. I mean, I have a special place for Bengaluru in my heart as well. I've lived there. I've had friends there. I've been visiting. And like you said, Hyderabad and Bengaluru have a kind of a bittersweet relationship. We love each other, but we also compete with each other. Kind of, of us. I think we think of ourselves as sisters from the same, cousins of the same family.
You're in Hyderabad, right?
Sorry?
You're in Hyderabad, right?
I live in Hyderabad. So yes, but so kind of related to this question is you did write a book on the Vodayars, and Mysore has always been seen as the cultural capital of Karnataka.
Yeah.
So my question to you would be that what prompted you to write the book on Vodayars? And Vodayars themselves have a very complicated past. While you were doing your research, did you go through did you stumble upon facts or things that you didn't expect to find there, had an aha moment or, oh, fancy that kind of a moment? Would you like to share with us?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. And so I often say my journey into writing and history has been serendipitous. I never planned it. It was a very, very happy accident. I was a boy of about 12 or 13 years of age, studying in school, hating history the way it was taught. Almost every history class meant kneeling down outside. I received such harsh punishments, basically for messing up history, and for which especially my mother had to go to the history teacher and the school several times and fight and so on. So today, to even imagine that I'm a historian is quite a shocker for most people, particularly my school teachers. But around that time, if you remember in the 90s, you had this serial called The Sword of Tipu Sultan on Doordarshan. Yes, produced by Sanjay Khan. And that serial, I think, upset a lot of apple cart because in its portrayal of the Mysore royal family, the Vodayar Maharaja was shown as an obese regard who was dancing with
corpulent figure.
and dancing with the court dancer and totally emasculated and so on. And then this Maharani was shown as this very conniving woman who's always conspiring and so on. And about that, I think there were lots and lots of protests in different parts of Karnataka, particularly southern Karnataka, which was the erstwhile Mysore state, where after so many years after the dynasty ceased to be in power, it's still held in a lot of regard and reverence for the wonderful work that the Vodayar family did. A lot of firsts to their credit. Probably the first industries and the base for Karnataka's socio-economic and cultural development that was established by the Vodayars under rulers like Nalvadi Krishnaraj Vodayar and Jai Chamraj Vodayar, some of the very, very, far-sighted divans like Sir Ranga Charlu, Sir Mirza Ismail, Sir M. Vishweshwaraya, who went on to become Bharat Ratna, Sir Sheshadri Iyer. So several such, stalwarts, Albion Banerjee and others. So to show a kingdom which had this kind of contemporary regard was something that was very, very deeply problematic. And so there were spontaneous protests in different parts of the state. And if you remember, there was also the studio had caught fire, and I think Sanjay Khan's,
yeah, he had an accident, and there was
yes,
a scar which he had to cover up during the.
Yeah, and the popular myth that was doing the round was this was the curse of the Wadiyar, and so you had portrayed him in a bad way, and so he was paying the price. So as this teenager who was looking at all of this, who, as I said, hated history in school, there was something about it which moved me, and I don't know what it was, that I decided that I need to find out the truth behind this false representation, and it was a completely self-funded, self-motivated, self-initiated, journey, and which began more almost like a family project. My parents and my maternal grandmother and all of them would accompany me. Almost every vacation meant going to Mysore, meeting people of the royal family, meeting some historians there, rummaging palace archives, reading books, to first find out about that particular king and queen, Immadi Krishnaraj Wadiyar and Rani Lakshmi Ammani. They were the two people who were shown the way they were in that serial. So, and never really, Pujitaji, with the idea that I should write a book about it, or I should become a historian, or whatever else. It was just this childish curiosity and an inquiry for truth, which led me there. And slowly that inquiry, it turned into some kind of a madness, an obsession, where the interest lingered on for 10 long years, even as I did other things in life, like my engineering and my master's in mathematics or MBA or whatever else. This obsession for Mysore, its history, continued to remain. And I kept going there. I collected so much information. It was just a very informal scrapbook kind of a thing that I put together. I was also good in childhood at painting and making portraits. So a lot of sitting in the palace, it would be making portraits of all these Maharajas and so on. That's all it was. And after 10 years, when there was so much information gathered on the 600 years of the Wadiyar history, one of the longest reigning royal houses of India, I got to know that there was not a single book that encapsulated this entire period, written in one concise, comprehensive manner. And again, one of the banes of Indian historiography, where the south of the Vindhyas is hardly given a place in national discourse, like the Northeast and so many other parts of India don't figure significantly in the history of India. Even the Wadiyars, I don't remember reading about them in school at all, despite, as I said, they being like the Ahoms, one of the longest reigning royal houses of India. So that's when people advised me that you've gathered so much, so why don't you put this all together in the form of a book? And in 2008, almost, close to 15 years earlier, we came out with my first book, Splendors of Royal Mysore, the untold story of the Wadiyars. It was an untold story because no one had bothered to tell it before that. So that's how the whole foray into writing, into historiography began, very, very accidentally, as a happy accident.
Nice. So I actually was going to ask you next, because I didn't know that you have a background in engineering. You did your engineering from BITS Pilani, and you did your have another degree in mathematics also from BITS, and then you did your MBA, and then you were a part of corporate world. So it's an unlikely journey for a historian, and obviously very antithetical to how people perceive historians in general. Sort of befuddled looking and not very eloquent, and people who tend to drone on and on and on. So you're not a trained historian, but in your journey, you would have probably, I'm sure you read a lot. So who would you say are, your gurus in the field, or people you look up to, or historians that who are trained in the soil of this earth, not people who've written about India from across the shores, but raised here? Who are the people who've inspired you, the historians themselves?
Yeah. No, that's a fabulous question again, because my first, this whole, while I was doing this research, I was also reading copiously right from childhood, thanks to my parents who instilled this reading bug in me, along with the interest in classical music, in which they made me train in right from the age of 5 or 6 or so, in Carnatic classical music. But this introduction to reading happened also very early. And one of the earliest non-fiction writers from India whom I really, really admired and continue to admire is Arun Shourie. The the clinical manner in which he wrote several of his books, The World of Fatwas, or Worshipping False Gods, and about secularism, about so many of these, the eminent historians, his book, which kind of exposed me. I didn't know when I was reading it as a teenager that, one day I will be face to face with the same eminent historians, and who will be playing from the same playbook that Arun Shourie had put together. So that just shows that their thinking has not evolved over 20, 30 years. The same toolkit, very predictable and boring. That's how these people operate in a cabal fashion. So he was my introduction to a lot of what we would call as Indic, writing. And from there, I read Sitaram Goyalji, to Jadunath Sarkar, R.C. Majumdar, Neelkant Shastri, B.K. Rajwade, several of them, largely who would be construed or termed as nationalist historians, whatever that term means.
As if it were an abusive word.
Yeah. So several of these people, in my years of growing up and also thereafter, I still continue to revere these books that they have written. And most of them, it also showed how they were swimming completely against the tide, because the tide then in their times was both a regime that was unfavorable to them, and also the thraldom with which the discipline of history was kept in by the so-called trained professional historians. I think there is merit in getting trained in history and in the tools of historiography, which I eventually did as part of my PhD, which I did from the University of Queensland, in both in the history of music, a particular aspect of our musical history, the coming of the gramophone and its impact on Indian classical music, historical, social, cultural, and a musicological analysis of this episode. So those 4 years, of course, till then, a lot of it was amateur work, I would say, which was guided by, the spirit of inquiry, the spirit of reform. But the training did help in those 4 years to learn the tools of, academic research rigor and historical rigor, and how do you frame your arguments. That's certainly helpful. But other than that, I think this whole fascination that only trained historians can write history, I think that's a misnomer, because even, if you see how a lot of British accounts, particularly, which we still revere and use, these historians also would use, would be by,
I'm sure
engineers.
Yes.
They were largely engineers, they were surveyors and others.
So-called anthropologists, right?
Yes. So, like say Francis Buchanan, a traveler, or many others who were doing land surveys and all that. Then they were so fascinated by, or they wanted it to put something on about the place for their masters to use or whatever. So a lot of them were such people who have chronicled and whose works we still use. So it's nothing that you have to have a university in which a few people are sitting like a cabal, and only those who belong to that clique are the ones who are to be considered as historians. I think that's a modern, modern day problem, which gets further accentuated when it has ideological, underpinnings.
It's also about control, right? Who is controlling the power, knowledge center? So obviously they do not want, every Johnny come lately to come and tell them, according to them, this is, so it's about controlling knowledge.
Yes.
So kind of tagging on to that, my next question is about, how you were talking about how we learned history in school, and, many of our generation, even now, they have grown up on history textbooks that have being churned by the grist mills of, say, NCERT, a ship that was steered by the likes of Romila Thapar and company. So, and as a result, we are none the wiser. So I know that recently there was a controversy about, you were at the receiving end of some criticism about your opinion on this. Could you care to elaborate a little bit more on what you think of, our how our curriculum is designed as far as history is concerned? How do we teach? What do you think of the way we teach history in schools today?
Yeah, when I actually see the books today, I have a great sense of respect for even the bad books that I studied as a kid, because I think over time things have just become worse than what it was. I think the reference you were making was to that India Today conclave,
Yes.
where I had the pleasure of sharing stage with Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and we had a very healthy disagreement on what the role of history itself needs to be. Quite by chance, Dr. Tharoor did mention in that interaction that history was like a tool for nation building, and just as it came in the aftermath of the horrors of partition, the birth of a new nation, so you needed this tool to be used to build a new nation, and therefore a lot of uncomfortable truths, uncomfortable chapters in the long and bloody saga of our country had to be subsumed, had to be pushed under the carpet. And this is something quite accidentally he accepted as one of the objectives of history writing, which the Congress wanted to do, which I have serious problems with, because history is not a tool for nation building, according to me. Because if that is, then it can't exist both ways, that you don't then inculcate a sense of pride for your nation. Which is what I think our history books end up doing, because as I mentioned there too, a child who reads the history of her country, she almost feels that she is reading the story of some other nation and not her own. That sense of ownership, that sense that I'm talking about my nation, hardly comes true in the way our history textbooks are written. To everybody who's listening, I mean, these books are there online, free of cost, on the NCERT website. I would urge everyone to just visit and download the books, classes I think 6, 7, 8 or so, and then just download them and read them for your our pasts or something. That's what it is called. The way ancient India is represented, the way medieval and modern India is represented, I think it's completely something that nobody would be proud of. Give you some examples. So in ancient India, there are preposterous claims made that, of course, you have to calumnize a particular class, so the Brahmin class, the priestly class. So if history is used as nation building, and you don't want to talk about invasions only because it would demonize the Muslim community, falsely assumed so, then why would you want to demonize the Brahmins? So, but then that can happen, that can continue to happen. If there is societal conflict between Brahmins and other communities within Hinduism, then that is all fine. But then there should be no demonization only of the Muslims. So in the ancient India book, I think it says the Brahmins had become so corrupt, and so there were these havans and yajnas and all that was done, and so much of the produce that was there of milk and honey and all of this was liberally used, snatched away from the masses and actually put into these havans and homams and all that. And that led to mass famines in different parts of Vedic India, all kinds of stories. So somebody had actually filed, among several FIRs, one of the RTIs, someone had filed an RTI to find out what is the source of this thing, that there was a huge famine or regular famines during Vedic era, and the NCERT had no answer. The person who had written the book had no answer to that. Now, coming to even medieval India, and there was some so-called, some professionally trained historian who's in some foreign university who again challenged me, saying, oh, this is all bunkum, what he said, etc. And I said, anybody, as I said, can go and read it for themselves and make up their opinion. But what the glaring errors that I found, among several others, there's an entire document I have created, almost of 40 pages of all the errors and omissions in these books. Now, in the medieval book too, the incommensurate, attention that is given to certain very, very bigoted and intolerant kind of dynasties like the Khiljis and Lodhis and Tughlaqs. I don't know what their contribution to this country is and why we should dedicate an entire chapter to them. Whereas entire chapter, there are almost 2 or 3 chapters, of course, to the Mughals. But then the Cholas, under whom our maritime power extended to the southeast, probably less than half a page about the Cholas. The Vijayanagar Empire, yes, is also something like that only. And even the whole thing that the city of Hampi, which was extolled by so many foreign travelers, and we all have so many accounts of how gold and rubies and all that was being sold on the streets, and it was so prosperous and all of that. A city like Hampi probably has one line somewhere which just says it just fell by itself, as if there was no plunder, there was nothing happening, And the more shocking thing for me was Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj has only a photograph. There's only one photograph with a caption, slightly lengthy caption describing who the person in the photograph is. That is all that a young child would read and know about who Shivaji Maharaj is today. And the Peshwas perhaps get a few lines. So though the British themselves have accepted that they took India not from the Mughals, but actually from the Marathas. The Marathas. So what is their, the coverage in our history books? It's so less and so unimportant. It's deemed as, and so many other parts of the country, as we spoke earlier. The south of India, the Rashtrakutas, the northeast, the Ahoms, the dynasties of Manipur, of Tripura, of Nagaland, and all these places, they just don't feature in the story of India. Of course, if you're not talking about any royal families, you're just talking about people's history, that's great. So let's not talk about any royalty then. Let's just talk about subaltern history as it is made out of. But then when you're talking about giving, as I said, incommensurate attention to one particular region, which was Delhi, very Delhi-centric history that we have, and ignoring vast swathes of the land, then, either talk about everybody a little or talk about nobody. Have a complete recasting of the way we see our past. That is not done. So these are some of the fault lines and the issues. And as I said, the whole attempt to whitewash, to subsume, to under the false, assumption that national unity and social cohesion today would in some way be affected if you spoke the truth. I think that is one of the banes of Indian historiography.
What do you think is the psyche behind playing up the fault lines within some communities? Within some, like for example, you mentioned that within the Hindus, it's okay to play up the caste division, so-called caste division. We know that where the jatis are varnas, but that's the term used by people today. But it's not okay to do the same thing when Hindu and Muslims are concerned.
Yeah.
What is that psyche? I would you care to maybe reflect a little bit on that? What is it that makes them say, hey, it's okay to talk about the divisions here. Let's play this up because this requires our attention, but let's push this under the carpet.
Yeah, not only within the Hindus, Pujitaji, but also among Indic faiths. There was this famous episode where I think it was Sitaram Goyalji who challenged Romila Thapar that, when she had made some claim, I think in the context of Nalanda or whatever, that the Hindus actually persecuted the Buddhists, and she asked for evidence, and there were, I think, 2 or 3 inscriptions that she mentioned, 2 of which turned out to be false, and the other one was some vague thing which was not really linked to this particular topic at all, or the details, I forget now, but then I remember reading about this huge challenge, and he had actually challenged her to a public debate with him, with facts and figures, which she could produce to show if the Hindus and Buddhists were always at each other's throats. And she obviously ignored that challenge. So setting up conflicts among the Indic faiths, the faiths that have originated in this country, denying that continuity of civilization. I mean, the Buddhism and looking at these religions almost again from the Western lens, just as you had a Protestant revolution, you want to see Buddhism and Jainism through the same lens.
The same lens, exactly.
Same lens. And since the Protestant movement was an uprising of against the clergy and the Catholicism there, so you have to pit a very similar mirror image where
the Brahmins become
are kind of rebel religions against Brahminism and priestly class. Some iota of truth in it, but not completely, because eventually, for all that Gautam Buddha did, he got assimilated in the pantheon as one of the avatars of Lord Vishnu. Exactly. And that's what the Sanatan Dharma is all about. I mean, if those who are opposed to you, a Charvak who does not even believe in the philosophy of God or his existence, who called all the Vedas as lies, even he's called as a rishi. So even if Buddha went against some of the decadent social practices, and every society has decadent social practices over time, there is a degeneration and there is a resurgence, and that's been the story of our civilization, where every time the society goes through a trough, there's somebody who comes up from within, who, I mean, even Adi Shankaracharya would be a reformer against the kind of customs that were prevalent and so on.
He came up, and that's the beauty, like you said. I mean, Shankaracharya ji was, if we talk about any kind of conflict between Buddhism and Hinduism, it was a very dialogic in the sense that when Shankaracharya came into the picture, Buddhism was on the surge, and it was he who kind of through their constant dialoguing, there was so many in fact, if you look at his life history, I mean, he had these dialogues with everyone, and that's how Advaita philosophy took, its precedence. So when people talk about this conflict, this fight, this thing, I mean, like you said, they're always trying to see history with a very Western lens and try to make these false equivalences, which don't stand are not true.
Exactly, and particularly, like you hit the nail on the head about wanting not to talk about. So if you're okay talking about mythical or imagined conflicts between Hindus and Buddhists, but you don't want to talk about documented aspects of actual attacks, of genocide of the Hindus from the Islamic conquest over 1,000 long years. I mean, I think it was Dr. K.S. Lal, the historian, who had said something like 8 to 10 crore Hindus. The population of the subcontinent itself fell by about 8 to 10 crores between 1000 CE with the conquest of Afghanistan till the end of the Delhi Sultanate in 1525. So in those 500 years, there was this kind of a fall in the population of this subcontinent. And that did not happen just because everyone just dropped down dead. So, and you have Sitaram Goyal again in his very, very seminal and well-researched book listing all the temples that have been destroyed, almost 40,000 temples at the least, which were destroyed. Now, these are facts which need to be spoken about. It's not, again, I keep repeating this time and again, that it is not something that, as these historians and some of these politicians think, that today's Muslim men or women, a young person today, needs to be responsible for or needs to be hauled up for. It's not an albatross that you need to hang on their necks, because they are not responsible. They're probably as much a victim as anyone else, because probably our ancestors were either very lucky or brave that we continue to hold on to our faith. Whereas probably for some other people, it was a very unfortunate situation that they had to succumb. And so none of these people who are here have come from, say, from the Arab stock or from Jerusalem or anyone else. They're all Indians who were forced to convert for various reasons. Some may be voluntarily, and a lot also through coercion and all of that. So we need to dehyphenate this. And first of all, the very idea that a Muslim person needs to have an icon who belongs to the same community, I think that is deeply problematic. You don't have to create false icons just to make a particular community feel very happy and secure. But even if that is the case, you have a plethora of Muslim thinkers, right from Kabir to Ras Khan to, so many others. Sant Shishunal Sharif from my, state of Karnataka. You have APJ Abdul Kalam. You have Arif Muhammad Khan. You have so many others. Yeah.
Tariq Fateh ji.
Yes, so many who could be your, role models, and not necessarily Ghazni and Ghori and Aurangzeb, Tipu Sultan. And to make them icons, you have to whitewash. They put a lot of effort to whitewash their crimes, which is again telling the Muslims today that your heroes are these people, which I think is wrong. And that is, if that nation building tool, which was, revealed as the tool that history is what is the cause. This is a very bad way to build a nation, which is a nation whose foundation is built on lies and whitewashing. It is going to crumble at the very first breeze that is going to come. And that's exactly what has been happening time and again, because we've not made that foundation strong. We have not spoken of those tales of assimilation, rather spoken only to whitewash crimes, which will blow up in your face anytime. But then this is the false, assumption that these people labor under, that somehow these people, a community is going to feel very offended if you actually bring out the truth. You had that infamous circular, I think in 1989 in West Bengal, which was under communist rule then, where it had surveyed all the books, the history textbooks of the state syllabus of all classes, and came out with a circular issued by the government, mind you. I mean, the authority as the West Bengal government issuing a circular to the state board or whatever, saying how the books need to be revised. So there were two columns, one saying Ashuddho or impure, and the other saying Shuddho, which was the pure part. So under the Ashuddho came all the excesses. That Mahmud Ghazni demolished the Somnath Mandir, the Shivling was taken away and smashed into pieces and made as steps of masjid. That came under Ashuddho, and Shuddho said this should be deleted. So like that, if you actually see the several pages and pages of correction that was done, maximum amount of it being of Aurangzeb's crimes being whitewashed, it's an exercise as to what distortion and rewriting of history actually is, where all these uncomfortable truths should not be told. Why? Because today's Muslims will feel very bad about it. You should tell them that this was how this civilization was treated. Will Durant had called the Islamic conquest of India as one of the bloodiest stories of human history, not just of our country, but of human history. So all these points laid bear in front of them, not with revenge or as vengeful stories, but as timely reminders as to what would happen and what should not happen in our country ever again, and that the Muslims of our country need not either identify with these terrible elements, nor are they responsible for what they did, because then. And it's not some historical thing, Pujitaji. We know we are seeing it unravel in front of our eyes in Afghanistan with the Taliban's resurgence. Yes. So how the Taliban is treating its people or people of other faiths, women and so on, is not very different from what the Delhi Sultanate or the Mughals would have done 500, 600 years back. So we are not talking about some old story and reviving vengeful tales. It is happening right now in front of our eyes. And so this is a timely reminder to the Muslims of our country too, not to associate themselves with these elements which are so decadent, but actually have peaceful icons or have larger belief in the history of our country. Indonesia, being a completely, a Muslim majority country, still believes, the Ram Leela is a national, art form. The whole depiction of the Ram Leela. So where the
airline is Garuda and
yes, everything there. If you see all those countries, how can that coexistence happen where they acknowledge that culturally they are Hindu, but their roots are Hindu? But their faith is Muslim. So be it. That's a beautiful coexistence to happen. So why can't that happen in a secular country like India? Everybody just says, by your faith, you're whatever you are, and that's perfectly fine. The Sanatan Dharma allows different opinions to thrive, including atheists and agnostics and everything. It will certainly allow someone a worship of Allah or Jesus or whatever else. So what's the big deal? I mean, even Ninda Stuti was allowed, where
Yeah, exactly.
bhakti poets, in the worst of way, we were doing Ninda of the gods we worship. Sages and their wives would curse our
Yeah.
very gods. Vishnu got cursed by Tulsi, Vrinda, who later became Tulsi. So all these stories are there. So we are very accommodative. We will embrace all these faiths. So the only thing is, what's wrong in that whole, belief that culturally and by our roots, we are a particular, belief, which is the Sanatan belief. And then we've branched out into different paths. And we anyway say ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti. So all these paths lead to the truth as we see it. So I think if that sort of a approach is taken, rather than do subterfuge and do all this whitewash and all of that, it's going to blow up in your face sometime, and that's what is happening now.
Absolutely. True words weren't spoken. Vikramji, my next question is to do with your book on Veer Savarkar. I know, a lot of people have written on him, and he's a controversial figure for many reasons. So my question to you would be, what prompted you to write this book? And more importantly, what, if there was a purpose that it served, what purpose do you think the book served? Was it for a reason, and do you think the book served that purpose?
So, I come from a background which is half Maharashtrian. My mother was a Maharashtrian, and in my maternal side, there would be a lot of talk about Veer Savarkar. But then again, in my books in school, I had not read about him. Even there was not even a mention. This was in the 90s, the NCERT English book, which did not have any mention of him or of cellular jail and so on. I don't know how it is now, but in those days it was not there. But then there was these discussions about him at home and so on. I knew he existed, but I didn't know who exactly he was. But it was much later, my first brush with him, and that the fact that he was a controversial figure came in 2003, when the Vajpayee government put up his picture in the Central Hall of Parliament, and that created so much of a ruckus. Then a year later, you had Mani Shankar Iyer, throwing away the plaque in his honor in Kalapani, which his predecessor Ram Nayak had put there. So that gave me an idea that, okay, this man is somebody who raises a lot of heckles, though he died way back in 1966. And it's only gotten worse ever since. And from 2014, of course, he intrudes our contemporary political space, unlike probably any other character of the past, where everybody has an opinion about him. And, the Congress makes jibes at him, the BJP counter jibes. So all this nonsense, and whether he should be given Bharat Ratna or not is a part of election manifestos and all this. But amidst all this noise, if a young person today wants to know what is it about this man that causes so much of heartburn, there's so little material in English, at least. In Marathi, a lot of books are written on him and so on, but in English or even in Hindi, to read about Veer Savarkar. The last comprehensive biography in English was in 1960s, when he was still alive, by Dhananjay Keer. And after that, though, every year we've been revisiting our past, and that's how history is. It thrives on constant revision and re-evaluation. We've been having so many biographies of Gandhi, of Nehru, of even Bose, and so many others were being re-evaluated, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and others. But somehow Savarkar escaped this re-evaluation, despite being so contemporary, despite being so relevant, and despite the very fact that the philosophy he propounded of Hindutva is in the ascendant today in the country. And it's so politically and culturally relevant to discuss him. But still, the curious lack of academic scholarship or scholarly work on him was very, very amazing. And that's when I decided to take up the task of putting his life together in a very, very comprehensive manner, bringing all the facts and figures which are available in public domain as on date, and which I can lay my hands to into one sort of a comprehensive biography. I wanted to make it as a 3-volume biography, though, because there was so much material, but my publishers limited me to 2 volumes. And in these 2 volumes, I think what what they've achieved, I would like to believe that it's brought Savarkar back into some kind of a conversation today. And especially his proponents too. I mean, they too were actually defending him on very weak points, because the man had written so much. A lot of it was in Marathi, which was inaccessible to people, or they hadn't read it. So his proponents too would build very weak cases for him. So I think what the book has achieved is, whether it's the opponent or the proponent, you have an informed position. I think that's what has been my say all the time, that you can hate anybody, you can love anyone, but let it be informed love or informed hatred as to why I hate this person or why I love this person. So I think the two volumes have done just that put all this documents, all these archival material into public space with the story of the man itself, so that you can make up your mind yourself. I am not here to sit in judgment of him or give you prescribed conclusions. You read it, like for instance, all the petitions, which are infamously called mercy petitions and all of that, are there in the appendix to the book, in photo, every line, every word. One reads it, and it's in English after all, so all of us can read it and make up our own mind whether this was actually a groveling mercy petition or it was a very strategic move with various other motives and so on, about which I have spoken quite a bit. So it's up to the reader to make up her mind as to which way she would like to evaluate the legacy of Savarkar. And as I said, let it all be on an informed opinion about the person. So this and parallelly, I think what the two volumes have also done quite inadvertently is to bring up an alternative narrative to our freedom struggle itself. Through Savarkar remains just the protagonist, but in the background, you have the entire panorama of an alternative freedom struggle which is going on, of an armed conflict, a violent uprising right from 1857 to the naval mutiny of 1946, which will again urge the reader to reconsider the story that has been fed to us as to how we got our freedom. So that there was a Sashastra Kranti which was going on unabated, despite the mainstream and very important, mass movements of non-violence and satyagraha. Along with that, there was this also going, and which has never received the importance that it should. So I think the volumes put that story too into public domain, public discussion. And I would say these are the twin objectives. I've not thought that this is how it should be and so on. But what I'm seeing unravel is that these two aspects are coming to the fore in public discourse.
I agree, because I read, I haven't finished it, but I'm more than halfway through the first part. And I have to say that, we were while we studied history, we were told about the extremists and the moderates and so on and so forth, but we never were given, enough information as to what their exact positions were. And just how strong the extremist position too. For example, the whole India House, the India House in London, and how this was a movement. It was not just merely 2-3 people, or the Madan Lal Dhingra incident, for example. So much happened, and we were not even told about this. And suddenly, Gandhiji is put in the middle of, suddenly, boom, he comes and he appears in Congress, suddenly he becomes a central figure. There is something deeply suspicious about that. At the same time, that's what we were told. So I'm glad that these things are coming out, and I hope that people will read and will also, keep themselves abreast of the new findings. Not that these are new findings, just that these facts were not told to us earlier.
Yeah. No, even the terms you use, which we have been made to use very subconsciously.
Yeah.
Extremists. These are tags we have put. Gokhale didn't go around saying, Gopal Krishna Gokhale didn't say, I'm a moderate, and Bal Gangadhar Tilak didn't go and say, I'm an extremist.
Exactly.
So, post facto, you are giving these labels. Now, if these labels are changed and we call what are called extremists as nationalists, and what are moderates, we call them as loyalists, what they were, then you have another story, right?
Absolutely.
This labeling that you actually, without telling the story, you reveal a lot. Similarly, the very fact that, and the revolutionaries went one step further from even the so-called extremists by asking for complete freedom for the country. In 1905, 1907, when Madam Bhikaji Kama, along with Sardar Singh Rana, goes to the Socialist Conference, International Socialist Conference in Stuttgart in Germany in 1907, and unfurls the flag, which was designed by Savarkar and Hemchandra Das Kanungo of Bengal's Anushilan Samiti, and says, from today, India is completely free. You may do what you want. And this was a woman in an international conference going and unfurling this flag, despite British opposition to it. I don't know. This should be a very, very
all the textbooks. Exactly. This should be the chapter.
And everything else should revolve around these figures. Who, I mean, in the height of the First World War, embassies were created of free India across Europe, particularly Germany, where people like Virendranath Chattopadhyay and several others had formed a parallel government of free India already, along with the German help, and the German warships were coming and attacking British India, the ports, particularly of South India, of Port Blair and so on. Lala Hardayal and the Gadar party had taken the movement all the way till North America and Canada, where the Komagata Maru episode also happened. So all these figures, right through our struggle for freedom, the kind of sacrifices they gave, many of them from outside India, and then of course a lot of them from within India. These names, these figures, and with these labels that are put, I mean, for revolutionaries, you have Bipin Chandra and Mridula Mukherjee and others who in their book call them even today as terrorists, in the books. And these are the books that are prescribed for university, for UPSC exams and so on. And quite recently you had, and who are the terrorists? Bhagat Singh, Jatin Das, so many others, Shurjo Sen, all these people are called terrorists, revolutionary terrorists. So I think it was in 2016, it was Bhagat Singh's family which took a lot of exception to this, saying this term itself is so loaded, and it is being used in independent India, a term that was used against their forefathers by the British, to call them terrorists today. And for a young person, what does that do, Pujita ji, who reads and says Bhagat Singh is a terrorist? At the same time, the television is flashing news about terrorists gunning down so many civilians in Kashmir. Or what is happening?
He equates this person with...
Yeah, subconsciously, you're like, oh, Bhagat Singh was one of these kind of loonies who were killing people or going on a rampage. So these terms are very, very important. They say a lot without saying much. When you put that plaster on someone's forehead, you kind of demarcate a lot of the story without elaborating so much of the story. So this is a very, very subtle way of brainwash, which is done. So extremists, moderates, terrorists, all these things. So moderate, the word is it's very nice, right? Who would not like to be moderate? Reasonable, peaceful, non-violent, moderate. None of us would want to keep going on a rampage and being extreme and slapping people around or gun trotting. No one would want. As human beings, we would like to be moderate. So the aspirational goal is to become a moderate in life. Yes. So, and these are the people whom you have to follow. These are the people whose virtues you need to imbibe. So this is very, very subconscious brainwash, which is done without getting into the details. And today also, when you think of moderates, you see all those faces, right? Gopal Krishna Gokhale and all these. Yeah. So that's how we are trained to think in the long term.
Very true. Absolutely. And that's, to think of this elaborate scheme, what to call it? It's we've been hoodwinked for so long that it is, I think some of us are still kind of, wondering at how they could achieve to do this, over and so many years. Even with Gandhiji and, the whole, the elaborate charade, the persona that was created, and why maybe 5% or 10% of it may have been true. But then the rest of it was all just, a creation of of a certain camp of people.
Yeah.
So anyway, so my next question, Vikramji, is again, I mean, much has been said on this, but this is very pertinent today. Hindutva versus Hinduism. Could you care to shed some light on this? Because this is causing so much heartburn everywhere, and very few people really know the difference. And if there is a difference, and of course, we've had our political young Pandit, from the Congress party, who often sheds light on profound subjects. I don't know if you've seen the recent video of his, which was floating around on WhatsApp, where he attempts to throw some light on the difference between the two terms and fails miserably. So, if you could talk a little bit about the two terms and why do you think it's causing so much heartburn?
Well, why it is causing heartburn is, of course, politics, and they have to keep doing something. You have important elections coming up, so you need to keep and that too in an important state like Uttar Pradesh, where I think these issues matter. So that politics apart, that will keep going on. But then from more of a academic discussion about what these terms are, according to me, this whole thing that of the term itself of Hinduism, I think was a much later construct. It was only in the 1830s when the British first started using this term to mean anybody who was not a Muslim and a Christian and a Parsi and others in India. They were all Hindus, and they would be clubbed under this ism of Hinduism. Mm-hmm. And about 60 years later, in 1892, was when the Bengali scholar Chandranath Boshu, he first coined this word Hindutva in his book in Bengali about Hindutva and its history and so on. And ever since, I mean, if you look at it, this suffix of twa that is used for any word, it implies the state of being. So if you are a woman, nari and naritva, your state of being, a femininity. Similarly, a man, purushatva. So similarly, the state of being,
the essence,
the state of being of that particular adjective is what Hindutva is. So to that extent, Hindutva and Hinduism should actually be synonymous to each other just by the word. What is in English Hinduism is in Indian languages which don't have the ism thing.
Correct.
You have it as Hindutva. And about the Hindu term itself, I mean, there's so much of, was it a religious term always? Was it not? How did the world see us? In those aspects, it was more of an ethno-geographical and a cultural term where people outside India were looking at this country and calling us as Hindus, irrespective of whichever faith that was being practiced in this part of the world. Anybody who was on the other side of the Indus River or the Sindhu Nadi were all Hindus. So right from, the Achaemenid empires, Darius the Great, the Persian king, whose inscriptions talk about this Hindu and so on, to even Hyun Sang's accounts, the Chinese Buddhist traveler who came in the 7th century, he talking about this land called Intu, and the people as Intus. All of these things talk about this part of the world, which is, and the Arabs called it Al-Hind. So, the word Hindu itself not necessarily all the time had religious connotations, because for us it was never there. We always called it Sanatan Dharma, right? Something that is, and Dharma there is also not religion, but a way of life, a way of morals and ethics, and the Raj Dharma, the Pitru Dharma, Putra Dharma. Similarly, a Sanatan Dharma, that is unending flow of water, flow of knowledge, which goes on and on, irrespective of who comes and goes. So that's how we viewed faith and belief, and that is one reason we can assimilate everything. So if you had one central book or one central leader or whatever, then anybody who did not come under that rubric would actually be the other and thrown out, whereas we didn't do that. And that's one reason, as we discussed, even the Buddha could be taken in as one of the pantheon of the Hindu gods, and Charvak could also be assimilated. So this is etymologically, if we look at Hindu, the word, or Hinduism and Hindutva being very similar, that's what it is. But there was another aspect to Hindutva as was conceived in the 20th century. And this, I think, process started with people like Swami Dayanand Saraswati, Swami Vivekananda, Maharshi Aurobindo, and much later Savarkar, where there was also an idea to give a political arm to this Hindutva. Hindutva, the essence of being Hindu, also needed to have a sense of being able to resist, being able to put together a fight against forces that were predatory, forces that were secessionist, forces that were threatening to vivisect your subcontinent on the basis of religion, and succeeded in doing it eventually. So I've held this time and again. We may have lofty principles of the world is a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and Ekam Sat and Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. All that is lovely, lofty principles for us to have. But if it is unilateral and you're actually dealing with theologies which do not subscribe to this, which always think of my way or the highway, that there is one God and one book and one messenger, and anybody who does not subscribe to that are infidels, and they need to be treated in the worst manner. They're condemned to hellfire. Converting them or brutalizing them, vandalizing them is a birthright of the faithful. So in such a scenario, what does a religion or a faith or a way of life, whatever you may call it as, which is so egalitarian, which is so embracive, which is so peaceful, do when it comes head on with another theology, which is so, unilateral, virulent and unilateral in its approach? You can't be pusillanimous and just keep quoting the scriptures to such people. So we've had that. Even Lord Parashuram, who's one of the avatars of Lord Vishnu, picked up the arms despite being a Brahmin and went on this massacre against whom he considered as adharmis. Similarly, we have, so in our
Gita, the Gita itself is about
yes, about how the opponent may be your own guru, your own relative or whatever, but then if they are on the path of adharma, it's your duty to annihilate them. And it's a bounden dharmic duty to do that. Similarly, all our gods and goddesses are shown with weapons, and these are not just for some ornamentation. They all have done this, and the Devi worship that we do, Devi in those 9 days of Navratri, we worship her as the annihilator of one particular evil. There is the Durga Saptashati. If somebody reads it without the idea, it would look like a bloodbath that is going on every day. So, but then this is the whole idea where picking up arms or having that resistance has never been considered as a wrong thing to do. Absolute non-violence has never been a part of Sanatan Dharma. So to pick up your arms and defend yourself, your faith, your people, is something that is considered as a dharmic duty. So in that context was what the political Hindutva came up as a bulwark against political Islam, and the attempts by missionaries and so on to convert our people. So when Swami Vivekananda, somebody who on his way back, I think from America in the ship, there is some missionary who is spewing venom on Hindus and Hindu gods and calling them as pagans and so on, as was the case and perhaps still is. So to look down upon the faith, he kept hearing all of this, and at some point he rushed towards him, held him by his collar and said, if you utter one more word against my faith, I'm going to throw you into the ocean. That is Hindutva.
That is Swami Vivekananda.
That is Hindutva in action, right? That is where Hindutva is showing that I will remain quiet, I will listen to you, but if you go on and on, at some point I am going to resist. So Hindutva, the political arm of Hindutva, and political in today's context, we'll think, it's linked to some party or something, but political would mean something that urges you to stand up. So that arm, which, whether it was even Maharshi Aurobindo's, writings, never taught, he was very, very critical of Gandhi and his pacifist attitude, that he had almost emasculated the Hindu of any sense of resistance, legitimate resistance for their own rights. And at a time when Muslim separatism was at its peak, and we saw the horrors of partition, we saw Mopla carnages, we saw the Khilafat movement, we saw everything that was happening. Despite that, to turn a blind eye to that was suicidal for the Hindus, and we saw that eventual manifestation during partition, Deliverance Day, and all these run-up that happened to the horrors of partition. So in that context is where we see the birth of Hindutva as we talk about it today, as Hinduism that resists. Again, Hinduism, I'm using it as a euphemism here, but then, and also Hindutva, I also see it as a modernizing force. So if you wanted people to stand up and unite and fight against excesses against them, you had to consolidate yourself. And if the Hindu society did not have those elements of consolidation because of the fissures that were present, the caste system and all these evils that had divided us into so many sections, that had to be gotten rid of. So a lot of Hindutva Vadis, including Savarkar, always spoke of a casteless society and elimination of all these differences between us so that we could unite. So it was not only Hinduism that resisted, it was also Hinduism that was self-introspective enough to be able to purge itself of all the evils and consolidate yourself on modern ideals. So modernity too, seen from the Indic perspective rather than modernity seen from a Western perspective of what modernity is. I think all these aspects are what, according to me, encapsulates Hindutva.
Thank you for that absolutely elaborate, and I think you've covered the entire ground over there. And anyone who wants to know the difference, I think, should just hear this, and I think that should clear up a lot of doubts in the minds of people. My next question is to do with, because you have such an eclectic range of interests and you're also an avid musician, like you said, your book on Gohar Jan was also interesting, because I haven't read it, I intend to, but it's about, she was the first musician to have recorded on a gramophone, right?
Yeah.
And from the early 20th century, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, 1902.
Right. So, so could you talk a little bit about that journey, how you came upon this idea of writing the book, and also probably a little bit on the courtesan culture of the early 19th and 20th centuries? And because I'm a dancer and I, studied a lot of the Devadasi culture, etc. So there's a lot of controversy there too, with respect to the Devadasis and the courtesans and things of that nature. So what was a courtesan culture? How did the courtesans add to the wealth of art and culture in those eras in the 19th and 20th century?
Yeah. So my whole brush with Gohar Jan was again very, very serendipitous once again. Mm-hmm. I was researching on the Mysore family, and while I was in the palace archives, by chance I came across this box file which was full of letters from Gohar Jan in a larger file on the visiting musicians, from to Mysore. And the Mysore court was like a melting pot of so many different art forms in music. It was not just Carnatic music that was encouraged, but Hindustani music and Western music as well. And that osmosis between art forms helped immensely. It's said that Abdul Karim Khan Saab, the Kirana Gharana's founder, was in Mysore for a long time, and he was so influenced by the whole Kalpanaswaram's technique in Carnatic music, and he actually took Vasudevacharya, Mysore Vasudevacharya, as one of his gurus. He learned a lot of this from him, and then the sargams in the Kirana Gharana, which is very specific, were very much inspired by the Carnatic tradition. And in fact, on the gramophone, Khan Saab has recorded several Carnatic songs in a very different Hindustani kind of a flavor. So this osmosis, and a Muttaya Bhagavatar who was there in the Mysore court, he was so influenced by several of the ragas of Hindustani music, which people like Abdul Karim Khan or Barkatullah Khan on the sitar and others were playing, like Jai Jayavanti, which became Dvijavanti, or Sohini, which became Hamsanandi in Carnatic. So all these, synthesis of different forms. And Western musicians who were in the court, they were asked to, the Indian musicians were asked to collaborate with the Western classical musicians and notate for the first time, perhaps, this whole idea of writing down music.
Yes, which was not there.
Yeah, notations. And you had Otto Schmidt on the violin. You had Margaret Cousins on the piano and Veene Sheshanna on the veena, asked to collaborate together in a fusion concert. So it was a court which was so egalitarian, and we're talking about the early 20th century, 1910, 1920.
Do you have any recordings of these? Or,
yes, I do. I do. Yeah. So in that scenario, when I was researching about that, by chance, I found this little file of this lady who was called as the first dancing girl of India and a gramophone celebrity, who had come from distant Calcutta. She was not even born Muslim. She was born of a Hindu grandmother.
They say she's Armenian. Is it government?
Yes.
Armenian.
Yes, she was born of a Hindu grandmother, a British grandfather, an Armenian Christian father.
Interesting history. Very interesting.
Yes. And in fact, she was born in Azamgarh and then baptized in the Holy Trinity Church in Allahabad, and as Eileen Angelina Yobard. Yes. And then her parents have a divorce, and her mother takes her away along with a Muslim benefactor. They move to Banaras, where they convert to Islam, and the mother becomes Badi Malka Jan, and this one becomes Gohar Jan, and they then shift to Calcutta, which is the center of culture, art, with the moving of Wajid Ali Shah from Lucknow. And that whole place develops as a melting pot of culture in the northern belt, and that's where they become court musicians, courtesans in Wajid Ali Shah's court. And so, but then, despite being this great superstar of her time, she died in Mysore in 1930, very lonely, forlorn, with none by her bedside to shed tears for her. So her letters were there in that, where she's urging the Maharaja's government, please increase my salary, don't cut income tax. And the government, Maharaja's government, rejected all through, because they were paying her 500 rupees per month to a lady. Yeah. And given her a very lovely cottage in Mysore called Dilkush, which is there in the Chamundi Vihar even today. But she was obviously not satisfied, because she was an artist. In her heydays, she was throwing a party for 1,000 rupees when her cat gave birth to kittens, and she was, she was a flamboyant lady. Yeah, she went on a joyride across the city, and when the viceroy, came across her 6-horse-driven carriage, and he, refused to allow her to do this. He initially thought she was a queen because she was fair-skinned and she had all this finery and goggles and all of that. He actually accosted her, and then she's supposed to have said hello to him and sped off. But much later, he realized that she was a common courtesan, that, you could not do that. It was a crime to go on a 6-horse-driven buggy. And so that's when they decided to fine her 1,000 rupees a day to do that, and which she continued to do. And continue to pay the fine, but go on her joyrides across the thoroughfares of Calcutta. So for someone who was, all this was not there in that file, but just the fact that the name had a certain ring to it, I was so attracted by it, and I decided on the spur of the moment that I need to, write about this lady. Not knowing how to do it, because a Tawayef, no legal heirs, she died in 1930, and in Mysore, there was no way to link up. But then over 4 years, I think I chased her through the length and breadth of India, from the place of her death in Mysore to Azamgarh, where she was born, to Banaras, Darbhanga, Rampur, Calcutta, Mysore, Madras, and also outside India to Berlin and to London and so many places. Did
you get your material through families or through libraries, where archival material? Like, where did you get your material from?
It was all scattered, Pujita ji, because like, for instance, Berlin, where the man who came to record. So when recording technology came to India in 1902, it came from Europe, from London, the Gramophone Company of India, which came first. A lot of these agents who came to record were Europeans. And Frederick William Gaisberg, he was the German guy who came there to record first on the first Indian expedition of recording in 1902. So he, being a German, his family had accounts, his diary jottings and so on, where he spoke about these people he recorded who came to the studio. And in that, Gohar Jan was one of them. He was surely besotted by her singing and also her brilliance, where she never, wore the same clothes ever for another recording. And she came with so much of finery and all of that. And she bargained, being a woman, she bargained with the Europeans, whose language perhaps she only partially understood. But then bargained something like a 3,000, 4,000 rupees per recording session, which was a huge amount those days. And so some accounts like that. Then in London, both her mother was a great poet in Urdu, and she'd written this entire collection called Makhzane Ulfate Mallika, or the treasure trove of Malika's love. Which was not found anywhere in India, but the only copy of that was found in London in the British Library. And that had about 500 exquisite Urdu ghazals written by Malika Jan, and also brief biographical notes about her and her daughter. And similarly, Gohar faced a lot of court cases in her life, which I was very curious to find the original documents. In the Calcutta High Court, she had to prove her own parentage, as to she was indeed her mother's daughter after the death of her mother, and by a person who was trying to usurp all the property.
Yes, I believe I read this somewhere. Yes.
Yeah. So the court documents then became a very important source. And there's a story behind that as to how I somehow managed to get all those documents. Then from, word of mouth accounts. So it was piecing together a lot of
information.
Jigsaw puzzle, literally putting together to piece together some semblance of her life picture and what it was. And what I found during the course of that journey, very, very rewarding journey, which literally changed my life, it managed to give me, the book did much better than what I expected it to, right from winning the Sahitya Academy Award to awards outside India. And it got adapted to theatre by Lilette Dubey, who had this play called Gohar, and it's now going to become a Bollywood film by Ashutosh Gowarikar. So it gave me the gumption to leave my corporate life and actually take up writing and history full time, and also gave me a segue to the University of Queensland, which had seen all this work, and they invited me to do a PhD there on these topics. So it changed my life to a large extent, but it also gave me information which I never knew, that when recording came to India across the country, it was actually women who embraced it. The men folk stayed away because they were very, very suspicious of this new technology, and there were superstitions doing the rounds that if you record on the gramophone, that evil English instrument, then the chords will be displeased and you will lose your voice and all those things. But then women across India, north, south, east, west, it was they, and most of them belonging to the Tawaif and the Devdasi background, who actually lent their voice on the recording. And if they hadn't done that, Indian classical music or the music industry would not be what it is today. But once again, you spoke about the Devdasi culture. She was a very integral part of the customs and the traditions of our country, associated with temple rituals. In ancient India, a sacrifice, a havan would not be complete till there is a performance by a Devdasi. And even in the heights of Islamic rule, the Tawaif's kotha, it was not seen as is shown in Bollywood, as a brothel where people can go and do what they want. But it was a place where the nobility and their sons would be sent. The sons would
learn manners,
to learn adab and tehzeeb, and how to behave, how to eat the pan, how to sit, how to, a culture training school, so to say, was what the kotha was. So she was always a very important element in our social, cultural, religious lives. But I think a large extent of this demonization that happened during the British times, inspired by the social purity movements in Britain and the missionaries who came in droves here to purge the society of all these evils and decadent Indians and Indian traditions. And a lot of neo-literate Indians, they took to this, and that they felt this sense of shame about their own culture. And so to ingratiate themselves to the British, they also had to do something like this, where all these women, there was a campaign against them called the Anti-Notch campaign, where all of them were rubbished away as prostitutes, and the Devdasi Abolition Act, which ensured that there was no kind of rehabilitation for these women. They were all thrown away from national discourse without any attempts being made for their rehabilitation. And many of them actually took to flesh trade, or they, many of them migrated to the cinema world and reinvented themselves in Bombay cinema, in Calcutta, in Madras. So Nargis's mother, Jaddan Bai, or in the south you had MS.
Haidar Rahman comes from, if I'm not mistaken, Haidar Rahman, Jayprada. They come from the Gadasi Sani community, as we call it in the south.
And MS Subbulakshmi, the
MS herself.
Yes, who came from these. But these women, they had this about them, this constant never say die attitude, and whatever challenge that came their way, how to circumvent it, how to reinvent. When a new technology came, when the men were not picking it up, how do you adapt this? How do you negotiate with Europeans for a better pay? Which, entrepreneurial spirit that they had, reinvent themselves. And when strictures are put on performance, okay, forget it, let's try something else. A new cinema medium is there, let's embrace that. So this constant reinventing themselves, repositioning themselves, these are the true stories of feminism, if at all we need to talk about, as to how the women of this country kept reinventing themselves against all odds. So I think this whole project, it gave me, so in fact, along with two Grammy Award winners, Ricky Cage and Michael Graves, one of my new books is on that, which has just come out, called Women of the Records, which kind of talks about this entire, all these women, their anecdotal stories of their, courage and bravery. And this project, Pujitaji, also led me to establish the Archive of Indian Music, my trust, which is perhaps India's first online digital sound archive for vintage gramophone recordings, dating back to 1902. Because while researching on Gauhar Jan, I wanted to hear her music, being a student of music myself, but there were no 78 RPMs, there were no, the machines were not there, the needles were not available. So it was only with a few record collectors that I found her music. But that kindled this interest to, hear more or find more of these records. And to my horror, I saw that these were all scattered in chor bazaars, in raddi shops across India. That's where the valuable cultural heritage of the country lay. And on a fellowship to Berlin, I was there for about 6 months there. And during that time, I made a visit to almost all the sound archives in different parts of Europe, whether it was Berlin and Paris and Vienna and London and all of that. And two things struck me there. One was that almost all these places had a concept of a national sound archive, and also a lot of holdings of Indian recordings, not necessarily only of music, but also voices of Indians. For instance, there was an archive in Berlin called the Laut Archive, which had about 200 recordings of Indian prisoners of war of the First World War. Our ancestors who were prisoners of war in war camps in Germany, they were all this bhopu was put in front of them, and they were asked to say something in their native tongue. From Tamil to Pushto to Bengali to Sindhi to all kinds of languages. These people spoke some kissa, kahani, something like that. And Germans being Germans, for every 3-minute recording, there would be 20-30 pages of documentation as to who this fellow was, which village he came from in India, which school he studied, what was his father's name, what was the content that he spoke. And that was transliterated to German and translated to German and written in the native script. All of this. And most people there was also voices of Rabindranath Tagore. There were voices of Lala Hardayal. And sitting in Laut Archive in that cold, wintry Berlin morning, I had goose flesh just hearing Rabindranath Tagore talking at the University of Berlin, I think 1915 or something like that, which was there on one of those wax cylinders. And Lala Hardayal of the Gadar party, his voice, and so on. And the question that most people asked me there was, doesn't India have a national sound archive? And I couldn't tell them that yes, we just allow it to rot in chor bazaars and rati shops.
Correct.
Yeah. So on coming back, this was 2010 or 11, and I decided that the governments will not help and they would not do much. So with the help of Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai, who was then with Infosys, he helped me, with the seed capital to establish an archive called the Archive of Indian Music. We didn't even know how to set up a trust. I went to the notary. I realized you needed 2 more people, 3 people to set up a trust. I called my parents. They came up and doubled up as the other trustees of this organization. And that's how it grew with time. And we now have about 15,000, gramophone records collected from all over India. And constantly it is being digitized, and lots of people have been making donations of records, of LPs, of these spools, and also cassettes and so on. And we have someone who digitizes it all the time. And on SoundCloud, actually, if you on soundcloud.com, if one goes and types Archive of Indian Music, we are just uploading all the digitized material free of cost for people to sit and listen from the confines of their home, because I think this is our national treasure. It's not something that I own or anybody owns. It's an inheritance for every Indian and everyone in the world. So I have no right to be a gatekeeper and prevent access to this. So from the Raddi to the digital space where it can be freely heard, this whole journey of the last 10 years with the Archive of Indian Music, inspired by Goharjan, inspired by that story and that journey, that continues. And so we're trying new things of ensuring we tied up with the Google Cultural Institute to ensure that some of this, we have curated online exhibitions on thematic themes. So, when during the Independence Day or something, we had something on all the patriotic songs that were sung and recorded on the gramophone, and how the gramophone as a very important medium for stirring patriotic emotions among Indians in those times was there. Then on Women's Day, we had something on the women musicians. So things like this, where we can use modern technology to reach out to more people and bring these voices of the past into contemporary circulation. That's what we've been trying to do through the archive. Yeah.
That is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I'd probably, if maybe after this conversation, probably take down the link to the website, because this would be of so much interest to especially artists, because there's a wealth of. It's difficult to come by material in India. It's so difficult to just access material, and even if you were to go to a library, there is so much of bureaucracy and paperwork that you have to go through just to be able to read or access an archival, a text or things of that nature. So it's just I'm so glad that somebody like you have taken this up. It's a wonderful initiative. One last question before we wrap up. I just had to ask you this because there's a lot of talk about this happening, and I know it's not ultimately, it doesn't matter, but I just wanted your 2 cents on it. You must have heard of this comedian, Mr. Veer Das, whose litany of dreary complaints has become quite popular. Supposed to have been a comic act. I don't know what happened. Have you come across this?
Yes, I have.
I have only had the good fortune of watching just bits and pieces of what he said, but it looks like it went on and on and on. So what are your 2 cents? And do you think that the Indian right, if one were to call it that, do you think we have taken umbrage too soon, or do you think we've just been too reactionary, or should we just dismiss Mr. Veer Das or let him be? What are your 2 cents?
I think we give a lot of fuel to people who are craving for public attention and publicity. We do that very soon and very quickly. These criminal cases filed, and if I don't know in this case, but usually going on rampages and violence and all that, it just fuels. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. They are looking for this publicity, they're looking for this victimhood, they want to play the victim card, and we're giving all of that to them on a platter. I mean, whatever I heard his long monologue. I think badly written, badly delivered, and a lot of it I did not agree with. But
Yes.
I think he has a right to say what he has to say.
Correct.
Nobody can, prevent anybody from saying. And things like, oh, but he was saying that in another country and all that. I think that is very specious today, in today's day and age, where through the digital medium, you're sitting in Hyderabad, I'm in Bangalore, you could be in New York, I could be in Moscow, and we could still be having this conversation. It just doesn't matter where you say what you say. It is the very fact that you say something. That is what matters. And a lot of things, I mean, I even tweeted about it saying, while on the one hand, we are told that terror has no religion, but then gang rape certainly seems to have a religion.
Exactly.
The scheme of things. And as we always know, patriarchy also has a caste. So these are the two Indias which we are navigating to, the hypocrisies. So it would have been so much good for the so-called right, as you mentioned, to do a counter spoof, exposing each of, I mean, if somebody is trying to corner you through words, corner the person back with words of your own, which are more powerful, which are more better, and which are more, evocative, rather than go into all these, I mean, of course, just as he has a right to say what he has said, the Constitution also guarantees people who feel offended to go and file cases, because the Article 19(1) circumscribes free speech with all these curious things, which says if it is affecting someone's sentiments, how do you quantify sentiments? I may be offended, you may not be offended, someone else may be very offended. So you can't quantify offense. But then our Constitution gives space for these gray areas. We are not a absolutist free speech constitution at all. So legally, one is allowed to go and file cases. When the Wendy Doniger episode happened as well, Dinanath Batra was well within his rights to go to court. He didn't go and vandalize Wendy's house or burn her books or something. He took a very peaceful and a legal route to go to courts and said, this is a bunch of lies and this offends my sentiments as a practicing Hindu. So there's nothing wrong in doing that. So, but by doing that, of course, Wendy's book is very important to counter and so on, because it lays the ground for several generations of calumny. But some Veerdas here, there, who says something and so on, go on and on about them, give them so much of space in media, every day news debates about them. You're giving the demon what it likes the most.
Actually wants.
True. Yeah. So I think, so I would have loved to see, some of them have been doing this, but a lot of other people who posing as stand-up comedian, there was nothing comic or funny in what he said. So it was a monologue, a tirade against the country. So someone who could counter this in a beautiful prose, and record this and bombard the social media with counter points, that would have been so much more joyous to see. Where we've always been this civilization of Vad, Vivad, Samvad, Shankaracharya and Mandan Mishra, the debates that have gone on even between opponents. I think we need to reclaim that space rather than this quick outrage that happens. But I understand where this is coming from, Pujitaji, where for the longest time, we have allowed people to talk what they want, do what they want. Now, the same Veerdas or anybody could not say the same about some other faith. And get away with it without it being decapitated from the body. So, but then when it comes to the Hindu faith, it's a very easy punching bag. We've all laughed at that spoof in Jaane Bhi Do Yaro, where the whole,
the Sita and that
Draupadi and all that. Because today I see on social media some school in Haryana or something which did some spoof on Ram Leela. People are putting their foot down on it and saying you cannot demean our gods in such a bad way. I mean, this is something that, so it's a thin line how much umbrage you take, to the extent that you become so virulent.
You become so sensitive.
Sensitive about everything. And sometimes it's good to probably just loosen up, laugh at yourself, don't take yourself so seriously. But the risk of doing that is that you give a long rope which gets pulled and you will probably hung by the same rope someday. So it's a thin line which we need to decide how much and what all to give importance to. What is the proportion? Is it going to have far-reaching impact? How much are we to this thing? But at the same time, as I said, peacefully, legally going and filing cases is fortunately or unfortunately allowed as per law. And so while call to violence or burning someone's house or killing someone, cutting off their hands, all that has happened in India, where in Kerala, TJ Joseph's hands were cut off because something about the prophet and so on. Kamlesh Tiwari lost his life.
But this doesn't feature in Veer Das's tirade, unfortunately.
Yes. So yeah, the counter to his tirade could have been 10 tirades which say, yes, we come from two Indias where Veer Das gets away, but Kamlesh Tiwari loses his head and Joseph loses his hands. So yeah, so that would be a better counter than going on this rampage and fueling their publicity hunger, which they claim and want. Now, everybody is Googling him. Probably 90% of India didn't even know such a man.
And exactly. His purpose is served,
Yes.
So, anyway, so thank you so much, Vikramji. And before we go, would you like to talk a little bit about your future projects, anything that's coming up that we should look out for or keep our eyes peeled for?
Well, I'm actually working on a 3-book, project with Penguin. 2 are biographies, one on Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and another on Tipu Sultan, a man who raises a lot of heckles in my part of the country and probably the rest of it as well. And another one on unsung heroes and heroines from different parts of India across various time spans, and stories of valor, stories of resistance, where against the popular narrative that we only lost wars.
Absolutely.
The very fact that we are around as a civilization shows that there were some wars we won also, there was some resistance also, and we were not wiped out by everybody who came and invaded us, the Sone Ki Chidiya that we were. So a lot of these stories, a small compilation of several such short biographies of them is what I'm planning to bring it out by the 75th year of our freedom in 2022. So lots of work to do, and the archive and some of the festivals I curate, including Earth Culture Fest, which happens every year, very similar to the Festival of Bharat that you do, to bring Indic discourse, Dharmic discourse into the mainstream for younger people, to make it accessible and also cool to actually talk Indic rather than make it sound very, very esoteric and
ancient and irrelevant and all of that.
Yeah, true.
So thank you, Vikramji. I'm so grateful you made the time for us today, and it has been an amazing 90 odd minutes, and time just flew. And I'm sure the viewers who are watching learned a lot from our conversation. So thank you so much. I wish you all the very best on your future projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Please subscribe to our channel if you are a drifting browser and you like our content. Like and share widely. We are available on all social media platforms. Until we see each other again, namaskar.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.